Hi, everybody. This is Arkady Frekhtman. I'm a New York City trial attorney, and today we're going to continue with our trial analysis where we look at an actual trial so you can get a sense of what it is to do a trial. In the first episode, we talked about the opening statement, and we actually watched the opening statement from the plaintiff as well as from the defendant, and then we analyzed some of the arguments. Today, I wanted to look at some of the witnesses that both sides called during trial. So let's get into it and see how many we can get through. I'll try to be quick and get to the heart of the matter, but this was actually a long trial. It started on January 17th and it ended on February 10th. So it was about a 4 or 5 week trial. But let's get into it. The first doctor that the plaintiffs called was a doctor who treated the client, and I'm gonna skip over the testimony of the truck driver for now. This was a truck crash case. The truck driver, there was some good liability testimony in there, but because it's a rear end and it's fairly simple in terms of fault, he was rear-ended the plaintiff who was stopped waiting to make a left turn. I don't want to go into all the technicalities of liability. I want to show you how a doctor testifies at trial. I think that's interesting. So let's turn to that.
Please state and spell your first and last name.
Stephen, Stephen, K, spelled K-A-Y.
You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Dr. K.
Good afternoon.
Have you testified in court before?
Many times.
Okay, so you're familiar with the rules.
I am.
All right. And can you just briefly introduce yourself to the jury in terms of your educational background?
Harvard University undergraduate, University of Southern California for medical school. I've done a research year at Brigham and Women's Hospital. Subsequently, did my internship in general surgery at Vanderbilt University, and followed that with my residency in orthopedic surgery at UCLA. Finally, I did an extra year of training in the University of Texas Health Sciences Center in San Antonio, devoted to nothing but shoulders and shoulder surgery. Came back to Los Angeles. I've been in private practice over 35 years, but have also maintained an academic affiliation with UCLA, where I taught medical students and actually orthopedic surgery residents in the Wadsworth VA clinic for shoulders and shoulder surgery. Have a couple of book chapters published, a number of articles published, virtually all on shoulders. And at this point I've slowed things down so I could meet my 10 grandchildren.
Okay. So since residency, have you been clinically operating on people's shoulders?
Sure. So I've done thousands of shoulder surgeries. I have probably seen over 50,000 shoulder patients over the last 35 years. I stopped doing surgery as a primary surgeon in 2022.
So this is interesting because, he goes up there, he has the model of the shoulder, and see, the first thing that the plaintiff's attorney does is goes through his education, his training, his experience to show that this is an expert, this is a doctor, he's done thousands of surgeries, right? And then the jury will choose whether or not his opinions are credible. So I'm going to skip ahead maybe to get to some of his opinions about the case to see what he says. I don't think they used any slides with him. No, I do see some slides later on. Maybe that's of the actual surgery. So let me jump ahead.
That's correct, Your Honor.
These are images.
These are photographs.
Yes, Your Honor. Images.
Yes.
Thank you. With the court's permission. Okay.
Oh, great.
And we might need to zoom in on this for the benefit of the jury, but Doctor, can you tell the jury what it is that we're looking at here?
This is the inside of the shoulder. So the surgery that we did, which is common, is to use a miniature television camera and poke it through the soft tissue into the actual joint. So these are pictures from inside the joint. And it is helpful, I think, if we understand the anatomy as to why the accident would have potentially caused the problem that we fixed. So if you look at picture number 1, what you see, is there a pointer by any chance or no? Ah, stick, perfect. I'm old school because I'm old. I will use a stick. Perfect. So, may I get out of the box?
Yeah.
So, this is the top of your arm bone, the humerus. This is the socket into which it fits. And this is a rope. It is the biceps tendon. So we talked about the muscle in the front of the shoulder having to attach somewhere. It attaches through 2 ropes, one of which goes right into the joint and attaches to the labrum. So, again, may I use my model? If
Do
you
we
put,
have an exhibit number for the model?
No, that's
It would
his
just be-
model. Is it okay if it leaves with him?
It'll be, assuming there's no objection, it'll just be used for demonstrative purposes.
Okay. Is that,
objection.
okay, thank you.
thank you. So this is my shoulders if you're looking directly at me. My arm is here, my shoulder blade is this triangular thing. The top of the arm is round. And so you can see here the roundness of the top of the arm as it goes into the shoulder socket. The socket is vertical and slightly dish-shaped. So unlike a knee where the bone sits flat, basically, of the femur onto the tibia, here it's hanging, and so it's dependent on the tissues. Among them, the labrum. The labrum is just a circle of tissue that goes all the way around the rim of the socket. It helps stabilize the shoulder. It helps act as a buffer during impact. And the big difference between the labrum in the shoulder and the meniscus in the knee is the labrum in the shoulder is attached to the rope from the biceps. If you follow this rope, it turns sideways and goes directly into the shoulder joint and attaches to the labrum. So you can imagine if you have a good enough pull on that rope, you might damage its attachment site. Can we go now to the next? So go ahead and put 8 of them up, or however you want to do it, and I'll show you the one I want. Keep going. It's going to be, yeah, I'm trying to make this. Okay, so picture number 7 then gives you another good clear picture. Top of the arm bone that's round, and here's that biceps rope that's attaching here. Now we're going to get a better picture of here, but I want to just make sure you can see it's a rope, just like we talked about, coming in. All right, go back to the 8 again. And now the next page.
So we could see he's really explaining it simply like a rope attaching to the labrum, which is the lip where the shoulder gets inserted into the socket. And he's going to explain the injury to this particular client.
Okay, so there should be, if I can see well, yeah, perfect. So,
This is exhibit 408, page 2.
yes,
John, thank you.
let's look at 13, please. All right, so it's a little blurry, I apologize. Here's the rope coming in. Here's the socket here. And I've put this metal probe from outside the body into the shoulder and have levered up on the rope. The distance between this dark line and the undersurface here of the biceps is the labrum that is no longer attached to the bone in this area. It's attached to the bone everywhere else, but it's up and off. And this is what we repaired. So if you go to the next picture, number 14, what you can see is we've drilled a hole in the bone and put anchor material down into the bone. So when we tie it, we can bring the biceps anchor back to where it belongs. So if you have the next one, please. Pretty bad picture. Show me all of the ones on this page. Okay, so we're just, yeah, see, it looks pretty obvious here if we just leave this up. Here you can see these tissues going directly down and they disappear. So we've drilled into the bone and we're going to pull the biceps down. Show me page 3 and we'll be done. So, number 17. Good. Good. So here's the rope again. Here is the rope going into the labrum. And again, hard to see, I apologize, on these blow-ups. But the bottom line is, it now is attaching, and this is the top of the socket, so it's back down to where it should be.
So she had a labrum tear, that a lip of where the shoulder attaches into the socket was partially torn, and he repaired it. And he's showing intraoperative photographs that he took during the operation inside the body, because like he said, he puts in like a little television camera. It's known as an arthroscopic surgery. So he pretty much explains it fairly simply. Let me skip ahead and see if we can find the part where the lawyer asks him the questions as to, you know, your opinion, your training, your based on everything you've examined, what's your opinion with a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether or not the car crash caused the injury.
And is here. This is the labrum on the other side of the shoulder, because it's a circle, right? So when you cut across it, you're going to have two little triangles. And this is what it should look like, and this is what it looks like at the tear. Okay, so I think that's by far the most helpful of them, because you have the nice comparison there.
Right. So do you, based on your training experience, the hundreds or thousands of shoulders that you've seen, do you have an understanding of the mechanism of injury for something like this to happen?
Tens of thousands.
Okay. How did this happen, in your opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical probability?
Basically, this was reasonably probably from the tension on the biceps, pulling the labrum, and therefore causing the tear of the labrum.
And the biceps were pulled because of the forces in the wreck?
Yes.
Okay. So is it your opinion to a reasonable degree of medical probability that the injury to the shoulder came directly from the car wreck?
Correct. And remember, it's not just based on these images. Day one, severe motion limitation and pain. and tenderness over the biceps. Subsequent evaluation, MRI arthrogram showing the tear. Subsequent evaluation by orthopedic surgeon Robert Reich, diagnosing the tear, recommending surgery. Eventually gets to me, same evaluation, same recommendation. So it's the entire clinical picture.
So he explains like what his opinions are and makes it pretty clear. And then we could look quickly maybe into the cross-examination if we skip a bit ahead.
Mechanism for this shoulder injury and this crash. Did I have that right?
I didn't say anything about the position of her hands today.
And I understand you didn't say anything. The challenge I have is I can't really see what you're doing over here. And I thought I saw you have your hands up as though they're on a steering wheel. Did I miss something?
You added something. I have no idea about
But, hey,
that.
it's part of sitting down when you can't really see. It's no problem.
Sure.
I want to go back to the surgery from September of 2017. You've done these surgeries for years, correct?
Correct.
This specific type of surgery that you did on Miss Miyamoto, that was done arthroscopically, correct?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury what that means?
So what we talked about earlier, the pictures you saw are from a television camera. So arthroscopic surgery just means that we're putting a television scope into the joint, arthro joint scope, so arthroscopy. And therefore, we can see pretty directly what kind of problems there are or are not in the shoulder that we're looking at.
In the grand scheme of the work that you were doing as a surgeon, doctor, was this a fairly simple procedure that you performed on Miss Miyamoto?
I always balk at that. Let me say, I had an extra year of training to do shoulders and shoulder surgery. I have devoted my practice to that. 80% of everyone who walks in my door is a shoulder patient. And so I'm not the only good shoulder doctor in town, but there are many doctors who don't find this to be that easy. I will say that for many of us, it is a straightforward procedure and often gets a good outcome.
So he's trying to cross-examine basically to say, well, is it because the hands were in a certain place on the wheel? Is that what caused it? And then to say, look, it's just a simple surgery. It's not really that serious. So that's basically like a quick summary of the shoulder doctor. Let me jump to another doctor. I think most of the doctors in this case dealt with neurology because it was a brain injury. So let me jump to one of the neurologists and see how that went, how some of the testimony went with the neurologist and how they talked about the brain injury. Here's one of the neurologists that they called, or one of the main doctors that they called to diagnose the brain injury.
Mr. Rowley, you may finish.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Video surveillance. There was video surveillance taken years ago that the defense, that the company had done on Miss Miyamoto and her family. And then there was some recent video surveillance that was done after the discovery cutoff just a couple weeks ago. Did you review that?
I did.
And have you, well, first off, as a neurologist who's also evaluated cases like this, have you found video surveillance useful in other cases?
I have found video surveillance very useful in other cases.
Example.
I had a plastic surgeon who once claimed his hand was injured from being tied down in a bed after he had a colon surgery and said he could not perform any surgeries, let alone eat sushi, and they showed me a video of him eating sushi for an hour. I don't think his right hand injuries were real.
Okay. This case, does the video surveillance of Layla Miyamoto help or hurt your opinions?
It does not hurt my opinions
Why?
because you can still drive in this day and age with a lot of apps to help us so we don't get lost. You can also see that there's some limping, and it doesn't show any of the activities that she's claiming to have lost. There's no playing with kids, there's no hiking. All the things that are claimed to have been lost from this weren't videoed.
So in all the time that an investigator followed her around without her knowing, did it show her doing jumping jacks,
It did not. show-
skipping?
No.
Did it show her lifting heavy things above her head?
No.
Did it show her?
So this is the part about surveillance and how it doesn't really matter because it didn't show anything bad. So I guess the start of this testimony is probably a little bit earlier, where he gives some opinions and he talks, yeah, I must have missed it. I must have did the continuation of his testimony. But I think that's good. And then there's also another doctor. Let me jump ahead to another doctor that's also a doctor who talks about the brain.
Yesterday, the jurors heard Miss Miyamoto's son testify, who was 9 years old and who was in the car at the time of the collision.
Okay.
And hypothetically, if he were to have testified that after the impact, his mother didn't ask if he was okay or check on him, that she was just there, motionless, and he thought she was dead, would that be important to your opinions?
Relative to what part of the opinion?
Whether there's she's stunned, loss of consciousness, any, does it matter?
No, because it, first of all, a younger kid, traumatized, one, but more importantly, it's about, less about, it's the event, but always about, as a consequence of the event, how is Miss Miyamoto different? And it is very clear, it's compelling that she's had persistent changes over multiple years that are highly indicative of this very now well-established chronic traumatic brain injury.
Neuropsychologically, how can a patient have their brain concussed and be able to answer, questions with the police officer about what happened after looking at their vehicle and putting two and two together, and yet still have amnesia? How can that happen neuropsychologically?
Well, it happens because of what a traumatic brain injury is. A TBI is not a blow to the head and then the full plethora of symptoms evolve at that time. Traumatic brain injury is always a process, whether it's swelling, herniation, edema, what is called a neurometabolic cascade that occurs. And I see this very frequently where someone had an injury and they are diagnosed as, they may have had abrasion on their head, or they may have had all these other orthopedic histories. On the brain, there are three vascular networks, the dura mater, the arachnoid, and the pia, that's in the hills and valleys of the brain. When you have forces that the head is moving, it stops. The brain is in this vault, the skull. There's only about 1.5 centimeters distance between the base of the brain, above your two eyes and above your two ears, where the brain can move, and it accelerates and it slams the base of the brain. Now, those tiny vessels, like the pia mater in particular, they may stretch, or they typically stretch, and sometimes they begin to bleed. The bleeding is slow, hours, days, or a week or more, before it becomes evident something's wrong with the patient, because the blood will accrue in one part of the space between the brain and the skull itself. It has nowhere to go, and it begins to compress and to give symptoms. So my point is, it's always, how is the patient different prior to the subject event?
And the metabolic cascade that occurs after a brain is concussed, does that occur even though a CT scan doesn't show it?
No, this is objective. Cumulative doctors, Siegel and Fish already.
I understand. I'll allow this question.
Yeah. CT scans are almost universally unremarkable from the ER in closer proximity when an accident.
So you can see they explain how the brain injury is a process, the metabolic cascade, how some things cannot be seen on a CT scan because it's microscopic and it just doesn't get picked up by scan. So he really explains the nature of the injury. Let me jump ahead also, maybe do one other doctor. Here's another doctor they called in the trial.
And does that, does traumatic brain injury fall within the purview of what you do as a, would it be a PMR?
A PMR, physical medicine and rehabilitation, yes.
Also, a physiatrist is another term?
Physiatrist, yes, correct.
And what this field that you are in, is it kind of the midway point between neurology and orthopedic surgery? How would you describe it?
It's a midway point between a lot of specialties, rheumatology, neurology, surgery, and orthopedics. It all kind of combines.
So, during your residency, what was your focus? What did you injections into her body?
Correct.
And then surgeries 7?
Right, correct.
Or actually with the ER, 6 surgeries that does not include the injections. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
But the injections are actual surgical procedures.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
And then 1771 is the actual surgical timeline.
So they go through the injuries, so the same slides that they used during opening with the timeline, the surgical timeline to show the injuries. This doctor is PM&R, so physical medicine rehabilitation, a little bit about the brain, but also about the other injuries. And I believe there was one other doctor that they called that talked about the brain. Let me see if I could show a quick clip of that one.
Capital T2 weighted, or T2W.
So you can see a lot of things on this. You can see the scalp, you can see the skull, you can see this white, which is cerebral spinal fluid, the space around. The brain actually floats in cerebral spinal fluid. Inside the brain we have these fluid compartments called ventricles, so these are fluid spaces. And on this specific sequence you can see white matter and gray matter. No, gray matter is the brain cells, that's where all the thoughts are produced, and those thoughts or impulses are transmitted to the body via the white matter. So the white matter are like cables or wires. And on T2 weighted images, the white matter is actually charcoal gray, and the gray matter is more gray. So you can actually see the gray matter here more on the surface of the brain, and then this charcoal gray is white matter. And you can see an abnormal spot here which represents an insult to the brain just beneath the gray matter. It stands out. These are other sequences where we make the spinal fluid dark and make these abnormalities in the white matter stand out. So this just shows a area of abnormality within the white matter below the brain cortex. Now, is this related to trauma? I'm not entirely sure. It's what we call nonspecific. I usually, when I'm not sure of what caused that, I defer to the neurologist or treating doctors that know more about her condition. She is rather young to have white matter problems, so it could be related to the trauma. I think it's in the appropriate location, but I don't know if I could say that with certainty. But I would defer the opinion on that to the treating doctors who know more about her condition. But it's my understanding that she did have significant symptoms after this accident.
And if she had those significant clinical symptoms, problems with memory, headaches, just the symptoms of a concussion, of a traumatic brain injury, and the other things that could be possible causes for that are ruled out. Rule out the possible causes, and then we have the symptoms of traumatic brain injury from July of 2016. Would that make this a more likely than not sign, radiological objective sign of traumatic brain injury?
Yes.
So let's talk about how we would rule out other possible causes. What would those other possible causes be? Because the jurors are going to get her medical history. What would they be?
Well, the common causes, usually we see more of these in older people, and the common causes are high blood pressure, diabetes. There's a disease that affects the blood vessels called vasculitis.
So while he's a radiologist, a neuroradiologist, he can't say that it's caused by the car crash, right? He defers to the clinical doctor, the one who's actually treating her, but he'll rule out other causes. And that kind of leaves the car crash as the only cause. That's a smart way to do it. Let me jump a little bit ahead and see where he analyzes her results as well.
Water movement in brain tissue is restricted, and it tends to line up and move in the brain parallel to the white matter fibers. When those white matter fibers are disrupted, the water movement becomes more random. It's like when you have water in a glass, it moves everywhere. There's no restriction. But in some type of medium, like brain tissue, the water tends to line up parallel to the white matter fibers. So we can actually track that on MRI. And what these show is that, and we can also compare the right side and the left side. And generally the right side and left side, these values that we get that indicate either random water movement or very restricted water movement, they tend to be symmetric from side to side. So in this case, we did see asymmetry from right to left, where those values were more than 10% different.
The skull?
Yes.
And that can cause the injuries that we see here if they are injuries from trauma?
Yes.
Everything you've told us is based on your education, training, and experience and expressed to a degree of reasonable medical certainty?
Yes.
Those are all the questions, Ryan.
All right.
So you see how they end with that, get his opinion and all the injuries, and that it's to a reasonable degree of medical certainty. So yeah, that's a good example of the doctors and how they use the doctors during the trial. Now we could also look at some of the lay witnesses briefly, and I think they called a few lay witnesses. They called the client's son, because he was also in the car, but this was 8 years ago. He was 9, so he got, obviously, now he's, I think, close to 17 or so.
Jack, how old are you?
I'm 17.
Okay. And who is your mom?
Leila Miyamoto.
Okay. Do you remember the crash that happened?
I remember parts of it, yes.
Okay.
Just as a technical critique, like, I know this lawyer, he's a good lawyer, but he doesn't do as many trials. He's part of the team. But you see, every time he gets an answer, he says, okay. That's not, you don't want to do that, because that kind of leads the jury maybe not to be that interested, or it's a kind of a little bit of a tick or whatever. But otherwise, I think he does a good job. He goes through a lot of the injuries and goes through a lot of the real story, the human story from the son.
Who's that guy in the middle that's just a little bit taller than that, what looks like a boogie board?
That would be me.
That was you?
Yes.
How old were you at that time?
I want to say I was at least 7, because my little sister's there.
And what would you do? You go boogie boarding?
Yeah.
Okay. And what would your mom do?
She would go in the water with us. Sometimes she would hang back. Other times she would even take the boogie board herself.
Does your mom do any of that kind of stuff now?
No.
You could see, like, they go through some of the activities, what they were able to do, how it's affected their life. Let me see if there's any. Well, of course, the other main witness was the plaintiff. Her testimony took like hours, so I'm not going to maybe go through all of that, but also the cross-examination of her, and she had to hold up on cross-examination from the defendants. There was also the spine surgeon. Some of the witnesses came through on video conference, and then there was a few other just witnesses that are friends, that are family members, things like that. And then finally, the case concluded with the closing arguments. And we could do another video where we analyze the closing arguments. Those were also pretty interesting, and had a lot of summary of everything, right? Because they're like the summations or the closing arguments. It's kind of like called marshaling the evidence. So when you listen to all the witnesses, everything that happened, then you give your argument for why the jury should vote a certain way. based on all that. So we could look at that in another video. But thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to our channel. Let us know what questions you have. We are here for you. Our goal is helping serious injury victims and families. And I wanted to give you a little bit of a look into what an actual trial is. And this was the testimony portion where the lawyers ask questions and there's cross-examination and you call doctors as well as lay witnesses. Okay, all the best, everyone. Bye-bye.